I am Kim Rozenka. I'm the managing shareholder of Dean Mead's VR office. Last year we began the Brevard business briefings to create a forum for business leaders to come together to engage in community conversations about key issues at the forefront of today's local economy. This program starts the 2004 series of the Brevard business briefings. We're pleased to see such a large crowd here today of what promises to be an informative discussion about the upcoming legislative session. Dean Mead is a full-service law firm with 50 attorneys in Florida. This year, the VR office is celebrating its 25th anniversary of serving Florida's Space Coast. We've enjoyed long-standing business relationships with premier business organizations in Brevard, such as Florida Tech, the VR Company, and the EDC of Florida's Space Coast, just to name a few. We would like to thank Linda Weatherman and the entire team at the EDC for their leadership and for joining us today to present today's program. Before we get started with the panel discussion, I'd like to take a moment to recognize the public officials that are in the audience. First, we have the Honorable Thad Altman. Honorable Steve Crisafulli. The Honorable Debbie Mayfield. Honorable Mary Bolin Lewis, County Commission, Brevard County. Represented by Marcia, her assistant. We have Honorable Dave Netterstrom, the Mayor of City of Cocoa Beach. The Honorable Ben Malik, Commissioner, City of Cocoa Beach. I'm sorry if I pronounced it wrong. Okay. The Honorable Greg Jones, Vice Mayor, City of Melbourne. Honorable T. Patrick O'Neill, Councilman, City of Rockledge. Honorable Dominic Montanero, Councilman, City of Cocoa Beach, or excuse me, Satellite Beach. Honorable Stu Glass, Council Member, Town of Indialantic. And the Honorable Frank Sullivan, Port Canaveral Commission, Secretary and Treasurer. Last month, Dean Mead opened its 5th office in Florida in Tallahassee. It's my pleasure to introduce the Master of Ceremonies for today's program, Pete Dunbar. Pete leads the Government Relations, Lobbying, and Administrative Law team in Dean Mead's Tallahassee office. Drawing on a distinguished background of public service, Pete represents and advocates on behalf of a variety of private and public interests before the Florida Legislature and the executive branch departments and agencies of Florida state government. He began his long career in Florida government in 1967 as a staff director in the Florida Legislature. He served as a Pasco County attorney and later served for 5 terms as a member of the Florida House of Representatives. Upon leaving the legislature, he held the post of General Counsel and Director of Legislative Affairs for Governor Bob Martinez and later served as the General Counsel at the Department of Financial Services. Pete served as Chief of Staff during the transition from the Martinez administration to the administration of Governor Lawton Chiles, and he is former chairman and 2-term member of the Florida Ethics Commission. Thank you for joining us here this morning, and I'll turn the program over to Pete.
Thank you, Kim, and good morning, everybody. So, am I projecting okay? That's good. Okay, here's your homework assignment. When we're going to do some introductory questions from our 2 panelists, I'll introduce them again a little bit more in a minute. But if you've got questions this morning, they're taking all comers. So get yourself ready, and hopefully we'll get to that at some point. The main bios for our 2 guest panelists are in your program, and they're both well known to you. They are from this area, but let me give you just a brief overview for both of them. To my immediate left is Senator Thad Altman. He has served 5 years as a member of the Florida House of Representatives before being elected to the Florida Senate in 2008, and he has been subsequently reelected since then. I might parenthetically note that is on the ballot again this year. 2014 is an election year, and I will boldly predict he will be reelected one more time. Senator Altman serves as a member of 6 standing committees in the Senate, and he is the chairman of the let's try this again, long committee name, Military and Veterans Affairs, Space and Domestic Securities Committee. He also serves on 2 of the Senate Select Committees, including the Select Committee on the Indian River Lagoon and the Lake Okeechobee Basin. To Thad's left and to my far left is Representative Steve Crisafulli. He is a 4th-generation resident of Brevard County, and he was first elected to the Florida House of Representatives in 2008. He has been subsequently reelected in 2010 and 2012, and like that, he will be on the ballot again in 2014, and I will go way out on a limb and boldly predict he will be reelected as well in the fall. Steve currently serves as the House Majority Leader, and he is the Vice Chairman of the powerful House Appropriations Committee. In December of 2013, Representative Crisafulli was selected by his colleagues to lead that body during the next legislative term, and in November of 2014, he will become the Speaker of the Florida House of Representatives. Well, you got ahead of me a little bit and took my punchline, but in addition to their legislative service, they have been long community active, have a long history of community involvement here, public service here in Brevard County. Your community is well represented in the state capitol by these 2 gentlemen, and would you please join me one more time in welcoming our panelists to the podium. Senator, you drew the short straw. You're first. Every session, those of us that follow the process know that there are leadership issues, leadership priorities that have a tendency to dominate the session each year. Can you outline for us a little bit about what, first, the leadership priorities will be coming out of the Florida Senate beginning on the first Tuesday in March, and then maybe a little bit about your own personal priorities?
I think from the Senate perspective, and probably from the House as well, tax cuts are going to be the big priority. We really, for years on the Senate side, we have been wanting to repeal the driver registration taxes that were passed a few years ago. I think this will be the year that we finally do that. That was an across-the-board tax increase that kept our offices busy about 6 months after that passed. I see Christine Wayne, who used to work for me at the time, and now with AAR. So I think the governor's effort to do some tax reform and tax cuts. We have a good budget year this year. Numbers are finally turning around. We'd like to turn that back to the consumers, and that was right close to $1 billion increase at the time. We're looking for a $500 million tax break. I think that would be ultimately the #1 priority for the legislature. In terms of, at least for the Senate, in terms for the Space Coast, my personal priorities, #1 would be space. The governor's been very good to Space Florida and very good to the Space Coast. We've seen a lot of new industry move to our region. We took it hard on the chin when we lost the shuttle, but companies like AAR Airlift and Embraer and others that have been back, we've seen our commercial space program improve. I think for us, probably funding for Space Florida that has been quite robust in the past. This year, Space Florida was selected to take over the Space Shuttle Landing Facility, and that's with it. We hope we can get a little money from the state. I think there's a $2 to $3 million ask from Space Florida that we probably ought to consider to help them transition that to a commercial launch, takeoff, vertical takeoff, actually horizontal takeoff facility. We would hate to see that get into the wrong hands. So that's going to be one of my #1 personal priorities is funding for Space Florida. And of course, the Indian River Lagoon funding.
Well, we're going to get to that. I'm going to let you talk a little bit more about that because I know you serve on the Select Committee. But before I leave the Senate and go to Steve with the same set of questions, I didn't hear anything about gaming. And I know that the Senate Select Committee on Gaming has basically been out in front and on the lead. Are we going to see any major gaming legislation from the Senate and the Select Committee this year?
I hope not. I sort of pushed that back. I think, this is my prediction, this would be my first session where we've had the incumbent governor on the ballot, and he's the same party as it.
Oh, we're going to talk about that later,
too. So I think that's going to be gaming is always so controversial. I think we're going to see a session that's going to be, I don't want to use the word benign, but anytime we open up the gaming world, it seems to get real messy. And personally, I think it's, we've fought that battle the last 2 or 3 years. I'd like to see it kind of fade away.
Okay. Steve, Representative Crisafulli, priorities in the House this year. You're at the top of the pinnacle and about to emerge as the House leader. Where are the main issues that the House will match up on beginning this year? And then follow that up with your personal priorities.
Well, without being repetitive on what Thad had to say, the President of the Senate and the Speaker of the House are going to roll out their work plan 2.0, I believe, in the next week or so. So I don't want to step on the toes of the two of them.
Oh, we want to hear it here first.
Out of respect for the work that they're doing and knowing that they still haven't finalized that, but they're working through some details, I think you'll see something similar to what you saw last year with a work plan that comes together in conjunction with the House and the Senate on the priorities that they feel that we can match up on. Certainly last year they were successful in doing that. One issue that was still outstanding that I know will continue to be on that list will be pension reform. We believe that moving away from a defined benefit program is the best thing that the state can do at this time, moving into a defined contribution program that's more like a 401k style retirement plan. Right now, the state of Florida, each and every year in our budget, we shore up the defined benefit program with $500 million. We've been doing that year after year after year. We did not do that several years ago when we had a tough budget and a $6 billion deficit. But otherwise, the legislature has continued to shore that up. So we believe that moving away from that program is a healthy, fiscally responsible thing to do. Along with that, that obviously mentioned, other issues like the lagoon, and I know that we're going to talk about that more, and that's certainly become my number one priority because the Speaker has pointed me to handle that issue in the House, and it's not just the lagoon, and I've been very careful to talk about water issues in Florida because it's not just the East Coast of Central Florida that has had some problems over the last year, it's the state as a whole, and it's truthfully, if you research algae blooms anywhere on the internet, you're going to find something going on in every state across this nation. So we don't only have a quality problem, we have a quantity problem, and we're going to work to start putting a plan in place to move forward on that issue. And I think, long term, we have an opportunity to work to solve these problems, but you're not going to solve them overnight, and you're not going to solve them in 2 or 3 years. So that's going to be obviously a big priority for us moving forward. There is one piece of the bill one piece of the work plan 2.0 that the Speaker spoke about last week that's a priority of his, and it's basically called a Florida GI bill. It will help veterans with secondary education moving through the college ranks, helping them pay for that program, helping give an in-state tuition to veterans that don't reside in Florida, as well as paying for Florida Guard to go to school and for books and so forth. So you're going to see a lot of things come out. Vulnerable citizens of our state are going to have an opportunity to be a part of this year's conversation as well. And then obviously I think we can all be honest and know that Medicaid expansion will certainly be another issue that comes up before the legislature this year. And obviously last year nothing was done on that. We stayed put where we were. Thad had mentioned tax cuts, and $500 million tax cut is the goal that both the Senate President and the Speaker, as well as the Governor, have targeted. What goes into that is yet to be determined. Obviously, a lot of members in the legislature have different ideas. Thad had mentioned, tag and title fees, and that's certainly going to be, I would imagine, a large component of that tax cut. But there's a lot to be determined, and we'll soon find out what those issues might be.
Before I do a follow-up on the budget, let me come back to the retirement reforms. I know that was an issue that was very important to the House last year, passed the House last year. I think the issues in the Senate, can you pass it in the Senate this year?
I think there's an
Maybe I should
opportunity.
ask that of Pat.
Well, there's certainly conversations being had on how we can do that. I mean, we have to look at the sustainability of that program, and it's just not there. Right now, with a market as good as it is, we're funded at about 87%. The likelihood that we'll ever be as in good a shape as we are now is not likely. So, there's a reality to it, and we have to face it, and it's a tough decision to make. And the truth is, it doesn't affect anybody that's currently in the system. It's only new hires. What our plan was last year, and I think we have an opportunity to work on that with the Senate this year to try to massage that program out again. There's a lot of people that it could affect in the future, but we believe that giving them a program that's portable, that they can take with them, is a responsible thing for us to do. And a lot of people in this room, work under a 401k type retirement plan, and we live in a different time and place. And I will tell you, you look back in the late 80s in the Fortune 100 companies, about 60 some odd companies offered defined benefit programs. Today, less than 10 offer that program. So you can tell that it's, if it doesn't work in business, it shouldn't be working in government. And we believe in the House that we have an opportunity to do something there, and hopefully our Senate partners will work with us on that.
I know that you don't want to speak in some detail about budget yet, but Florida plans its budget for the benefit of those who don't follow it closely based on revenue projections that are made for the coming 18 months, and I know we've recently been through that. Tell me, from the projections by the revenue estimators, what does our budget situation look like going into the 2014 legislative session, knowing it's the only bill that the legislature has to pass? And
that's a good point, and that's one thing that, we try to make sure we remind people of, that is the only one thing that we're responsible to do in Tallahassee is pass a balanced budget. And as you mentioned, we are in a better budget position than we've been in the past. We're just over about $850 million in surplus is the projection. Certainly that could change. It could be more, could be less. But the reality is it becomes tougher for us as legislators. It's easy when there's no money just to say no, and we're going to streamline and be efficient and effective with taxpayer dollars. Now you have to find ways to prioritize your spending, and certainly when you're talking about $800 million, $850 million, and you start talking about $500 million tax cut, and 200 and something million dollars into water restoration, and another $400 million into Springs initiatives, and $100 million to Visit Florida. The next thing you know, you've spent all your money and more, and now you're cutting in places. So now it becomes time for us to prioritize. You put all the ideas on the table and start looking for the best way to utilize taxpayer dollars. And and for us, we believe that we need to be fiscally responsible with the money that's given to the state, and we're going to do that. And certainly we believe that giving a bulk of it back to the citizens of the state is the answer.
Dad, let me do a follow-up. I know you sit on the F&T Subcommittee of Appropriations. You formerly chaired that committee. You also sit on another appropriations committee. But on the F&T committee, you're going to be seeing the options on what those tax cuts are. Of the surplus of just under $1 billion, how much do you think will go to the tax cut programs that are being advocated, and will they extend beyond in any fashion the fees that you discussed earlier?
I think there's a chance that could extend beyond. I know the tag and title fee is something that the Senate, and I'm sure the House will agree, really wants to repeal. It's interesting to know that
they want to trade pension reform for that?
You never know. You never know.
Just kidding.
I'd be open to that. I think you're going to see a year of cooperation. That's you've been around. I'm sure you've sat through many sessions.
Too long.
Hopefully we'll get in and out without a whole lot of rancor and turmoil. But that tag and title fee is something very personal to me and to the Senate, because believe it or not, that was a fee increase, what we view as a tax increase, that the Senate never heard. Not a single committee in the Senate ever heard that. That increase came over in the middle of a budget negotiation in a very, very tough budget year. And the way the system works, Senate passes its budget, the House passes its budget. They're never the same. You appoint conference committees, and they negotiate a change. They negotiate the budget, and they work it out. And once it comes back as a conference report, and there are no amendments allowed to be filed, as you know. And you have to really eat a lot of crow in that process because no one really wants to blow the budget up. I mean, that's a pretty serious thing to happen. It did. It happened when, I think the last time was happened when we had Jim King and Johnny Bird, and that happened, what, 3 or 4 times. But so we would love to get a shot at that, and there's been bills in the past to try to repeal it. So we're very pleased that our House partners are open to changing that because, you know, everybody gets a tag every year, and it just something that hit home, we felt. And so I look forward to the opportunity to vote.
How big a
to
number
repeal
is that? Do we know how big a number that is if you're going to do it? Does that take up half the
Well, at the time, I think it was about
surplus?
$600 million. That may have dropped a little bit with a slowing economy, but it's in the $500 million range. I mean, it's going to take up a big part of that 500.
Would you do it all at once or phase it back in over time?
I would be for all at once.
Okay.
Sitting on the finance and tax, I'd love to see it just wipe it off the books, and I think it would be. I think it would send a good message to the people of Florida.
Steve, let me sort of do a follow-along with you. I assume that there will be some planning for monies to be spent in other areas. I know we've talked a little bit about economic development and a couple of other things. We'll talk more about that in a minute. But last year, education was a big priority. Will the legislature return to education as a priority, and will some of the surplus funds that are projected be used there?
Well, certainly, education and healthcare are 2 biggest nuts to crack when it comes to the budget, and that's where the majority of our funding goes. So, we will prioritize our spending based on those 2 categories. But, as I mentioned earlier, if you only have $850+ million in surplus, and you're putting $500 million into tax cuts, and there's other issues that are out there on the table, you have to real quickly define where you're going to prioritize your spending. So certainly we're going to look at education. I mean, that's always an evolving situation, as well as Medicaid, and more and more people have gone on to that program. And I can tell you, just since I've been in the process since 2008, Medicaid has increased about 50 some odd %. In my time there. So that's a number that continues to grow. So we have to make sure that, first and foremost, we're funding the programs that we're required to fund, and then we can look at these other issues as we move along.
I know about that building the tax base part of that is helping Florida's economy recover. I know the governor's asked for almost $100 billion, which I think is about a $35 million increase on Visit Florida to promote tourism and things like that. Chances that he will get all of that funding, or would you prefer not to speculate?
Well, again, we have to prioritize things. I mean, we can all sit here and think, man, that would be wonderful, and talk about how great it would be to put that kind of money into marketing Florida. But, you can talk to a lot of folks in the tourism industry that get a little bit concerned about it, because then you start to see spikes. And, the tourism industry would rather see a continual, gradual increase in funding so that they can continue to, to market appropriately. But, the fear is you do $100 million this year, you have a budget shortfall, and then you dip, and then you start, suffering the consequences of not being out there with your product. So, I think there's a fine balance there, and certainly I'm interested in continuing to promote Florida. I don't think anybody can argue with that. But again, it comes down to prioritizing, where we want to put those dollars, and is that the best place for us to do that for economic development? Is there other opportunities with space, or encouraging other manufacturing to come to Florida? So, we have some decisions to make, and thankfully there's 160 members of the legislature, and we all get an opportunity to say our piece, and we'll do that. And that's the great thing about this process is we'll get to put it through a committee process and have the conversation on what we feel is the best way to spend those dollars.
Thad, as a sort of a related area, economic development has been an important priority for the governor, for the legislature. What can the legislature do this year to improve the recruitment of new businesses to Florida and to help local communities, economic development councils engage in that recruitment? I think Brevard was one of the very successful ones in the last calendar year, but looking forward, what more can be done by the legislature?
Well, I think continuing to do what we've been doing and supporting Enterprise Florida and supporting Space Florida's budget request, and maybe even step that up a little bit on the Space Florida side, because some of the new challenges that we're going to have with commercialization of space, that's important to our region. There's still some aerospace, aviation-related tax breaks that we'd like to give. I mean, they're not a whole lot of money, but they mean a lot to that sector. That is a targeted sector. We all know how important that sector is for us here on the Space Coast. So I think some of the additional tax incentives that we can lay on the table and for helping aerospace, and removal of some of the onerous taxes that are laid upon aircraft maintenance and manufacturing, and some of the other type of activities that we might be able to lure more of those type of industries. We going back here on specifically on the Space Coast, you know, we are seeing a change. I mean, we're seeing a significant change in the way that this country embarks upon a human spaceflight program. We're beginning to see the reality of commercial space come to fore. We've had some really good news this week with the funding for the Mars mission, the new launch system that will provide the launch system that will get us back to the moon, perhaps to Mars, maybe to an asteroid. Orion is continuing to be funded. That's being built right here at the Kennedy Space Center. So good news on a federal level with NASA's budget, and good news on what's happening in the commercial sector too. So continuing to enable us to be very, very competitive in that sector is going to be real important to this region.
Let me stay with you a minute, Senator, and move away from the budget. As Florida begins to recover, or has begun to recover, continues to grow, we continue to hear more about growth planning environment, and the particular buzzword these days, lots of discussion about it, is water quality and water supply. Is water our greatest challenge going forward, both from the policy perspective of the legislature and then how local governments deal with it?
Well, I've said people come to Florida for three reasons: warmth, weather, and water. I mean, if we lose our water resources, we're going to lose not only a very important commodity for consumption and economic growth, but also for recreation and quality of life. It plays a very important role here in Florida. It's very important. We have liquid water this time of year. Up north they have solid water, so our liquid water is important in terms of bringing people down to the warm weather. But when it gets to a point where you can't even swim in the water that we have, like we really faced in the Indian River Lagoon, where really there were actually no swimming. There were closures of people's ability to access that very important water body. That's a very serious, not only from an environmental point of view, but a very serious quality of life and economic development point of view. So water resources are important in balancing water consumption and water use for manufacturing, but at the same time protecting our natural, and agriculture, another big user of water, but at the same time protecting our ecosystem and our natural systems. So the quality of life that brings so many people here for its the beauty and the environmental amenities that we have is very important to our economic development. I think if you talk to a lot of the high-tech leaders in this community, they'll tell you that it was one of the main reasons they came to Florida, was the high quality of life and the environmental assets.
Steve, I know that you see this through multiple perspectives, both as a public official, but also from your private personal experience, and I've read several comments that this will be a priority for you personally as you move forward. Talk to me a little bit about, or tell us a little bit about, how the state, in particular the legislature, will be addressing water and these related issues both this year and then during your speakership, when I suspect it will have a very high priority.
Sure. Thanks, Pete. Well, yeah, I mean, and it is long-term, and I think we all have to realize that the reality is that there's, an issue out there that can't be solved overnight, and I've been very careful, as I mentioned, to make sure that when we talk about water, we talk about it in a comprehensive approach, because, sometimes you can get real parochial and get laser vision on one area of the state, and truth be told, we have issues in Apalachicola in the bay with the oysters. We have issues in the spring shed areas. We have issues here in Indian River Lagoon. We have issues upper North Lake Kissimmee. We have issues over in Crisafulli River. So, it's not just this region that's having the challenges with regard to water. And I see it as something that we have to, first and foremost, given a budget situation that we're in, take advantage of that and try to prioritize funding towards projects that will have an immediate impact and a positive immediate impact. Now, whether that's with quality or quantity, that's to be determined, or if it's for both. And I think that, you've heard conversations about, with regard to Indian River Lagoon, for instance, it's all in our backyard, we can relate to it. We're talking about, an ask of $20 million to remove about 600,000 cubic yards of muck from the Ogallie River region. All total, there's about 5 or 6 million cubic yards of muck that needs to be removed. So we got to look at that in a long-term perspective. And Jerry Sansom, who is here with FIND, he has worked with their engineers and scientists, and as well as those at FIT and Dr. Cantonese. We appreciate y'all being engaged in that. And we feel, Thad and I, obviously, we're strong proponents of having FIT be a component in studying what's going on in the lagoon. But we think that there's an opportunity to put a work plan in place to take care of that particular issue. Now, how we do that over a 3, 4, 5 year period is to be determined, and it's going to be determined by not just Thad and I, but a bunch of other legislators that are in Tallahassee that have issues in their own backyard as well. So, to answer the question, I think it's about sitting down and prioritizing where the immediate needs are. And that's what we're going to be focused on. I mean, there's opportunities for water storage for long-term, for the future of development and agriculture in our state. And, we need to recognize that need as well. So I think, we're going to start having those conversations. Obviously, we've already started committee weeks back in the fall. We're back at it now. But, those conversations are going to be more frequent for sure, and certainly more engaging. And I think we have a great opportunity to work on this issue. Actually, just a couple of weeks ago, Senator Gardner had his designation for the President of the Senate. And for those of you who don't know, Senator Gardner represents the north end of Brevard County as well as Orange County. So he has a strong interest in working on this issue as well. And I think we're going to have great partnership, not only this year, but for the years to come with regard to this issue.
Thad, let me ask if you want to have a follow-up comment or questions. I know you've been on the Select Committee as well, and I also know that the Senate Appropriations Chairman, Joe Negron, has set aside a proposal for, $20 million a year for 10 years, Steve, I think you said. Comments on what the Senate may do with Indian River Lagoon?
Well, our Select Committee supported the $20 million appropriation for the beginning of removal, and I do want to praise Speaker-Select Crisafulli for his leadership on the water issues. I mean, he's really has a lot of history and understanding of that issue from his agriculture past and business background, and I think we're going to see some big steps forward in terms of addressing some immediate needs, but the emphasis has always been in our Select Committee in short-term fixes, things that we can do very quickly that have immediate return. I think under the leadership we have coming in the House and the Senate with Speaker Crisafulli and President Gardner, we'll probably tackle the water issues on a more long-range, long-term basis. Those are incredibly complex issues, and we've been fighting water wars for a very long time. And I'm just extremely pleased that this issue is getting so much attention. It's something I've dedicated much of my life, beginning back in the mid-'80s, toward addressing water quality issues. And we know that they're not going to go away. And if we don't solve them, we're going to find ourselves in a very, very bad place. With poor water quality, our springs, our estuaries, our rivers being polluted, not enough water to consume for economic development and growth. The time is here, and I think the leadership that we have in place is going to be adequate to really rise to the occasion and address this very, very serious problem. I think we're going to do well, and I'm optimistic that we'll get close to that amount. You never know. You don't count your eggs till they're hatched. But I think we're going to have a good year, and we're going to see some movement toward addressing the problem. But it will be it will be a long-term process, just as Speaker Crisafulli mentioned.
Thank you, Thad. I am watching the clock, and I'm going to give you a heads up that if you have questions, my time is about up. I've got about 90 seconds, but I can't let these two gentlemen get away without at least a couple of political questions. So before we turn it over to audience questions, Representative Crisafulli, tell me what you think of our new lieutenant governor. We went with that one for quite a long time. Governor announced Carlos Lopez Cantera to take that position last week. Did he make a good choice?
I believe he did. I've served actually 4 years with Carlos, and he's a strong proponent of conservative principles, which aligns very well with the governor, and he's certainly very involved in South Florida. And I think that'll be helpful to the governor when it comes time to bring folks to the poll. Carlos is someone who's not scared to get out there and have a conversation about the issues that are important to Floridians, and I think he made a very good choice. Obviously, every lieutenant governor has a different role. I guess we're still waiting to see what that role will be for Carlos, but I certainly believe he did make a good decision.
Thad, you serve with Carlos as well. What do you think of the new lieutenant governor?
I just think the role of Carlos Lopez Cantera, he's a great guy. He's I served with him for 4 or 5 years. I think almost.
He might have been your majority leader. He had the position Steve had at one point.
He came in right after I left. But Carlos is a fine person. He is a conservative, but he's also a pragmatist. He comes from a business background, a family business background, and what I really enjoyed about Carlos was the fact that he was very pragmatic and reasonable in how to solve problems. He'd have been a great senator, I think. But he was a leader in the House. He was able to find solutions to some very complex problems. He was willing to stick his neck out, and he's a risk taker. And again, he has a strong business background. Growing up in a family business, I think that brings a perspective that is very important to the legislative process. We don't solve these problems using government. We turn first to the private sector, and we look for that partnership between the public and private sector. I know Speaker Crisafulli, coming from a business background, has the same view, and Carlos Lopez Cantera brings that strong business perspective. He's young, he's innovative, he's energetic, and just a fun guy to be around. I mean, he's a great person. Okay,
so we have a consensus that the governor made a good choice, and among the political watchers, the consensus is there's only one competitive race statewide on the ballot this year. Is the governor going to get reelected now that he's made a good choice for lieutenant governor? Thad?
Absolutely.
Thad, leading that. Okay. Let me do this. We do have a little bit of time left. If you have questions, please raise your hand and we'll get you a microphone. Oh, it's just too easy a crowd this morning with only one question, but I've got somebody that lights the spark.
Good morning. I want to thank Dean Mead and also our partners, the EDC, for the program, and Senator and Representative as well. Joe Mayer with Lockheed Martin. I want to pick up on the Lieutenant Governor issue in a manner, going back to economic incentives and the importance of funding for Space Florida for this region and for the state, for the statewide mission that Space Florida has. We've experienced some major successes. Senator mentioned the Orion program. For the first time that we're building a human spaceflight vehicle at the Kennedy Space Center as we speak, to fly out into orbit to deep space for missions to the moon or an asteroid, and ultimately one day to Mars. And we'll fly that for the first time uncrewed this fall. I'm wondering if the Lieutenant Governor will play as a kind of point guard, or maybe this season the quarterback for championing this Space Florida budget request and helping to ensure that the programs are funded and that we have the resources to attract and to continue to build the Florida as a major aerospace presence and a leader in the national space program worldwide.
Dad, you want to take that?
Well, first, thanks, Joe, for your company who's building Orion and doing a phenomenal job. We had a partnership back when Jeb Bush was governor. We had a $35 million incentive package, that said whoever wins the contract to build Orion, if they build it here in the Space Coast, we would use that money to help retrofit the O&C building at the Cape, and it is one of the premier showcase success stories in economic development, how it can work. And I think your question, Lieutenant Governor Carlos Lopez Quintero, I hope, it's up to the governor who chairs Space Florida. I think Carlos would be a great advocate in that capacity. He's strong on space. The entire Dade delegation has been. I've never seen an issue where there's stronger bipartisan geographic diversity in terms of support both in the House and the Senate. Has been incredibly supportive, and so I think he brings a lot to the table. Being from South Florida, it shows that space is a statewide endeavor, and like I said, I think that's ultimately the governor's decision who he chooses to run Space Florida. The fact that he chose Carlos, he knows the lieutenant governor has been historically the leader in space-related. It was that way with Tony Jennings and Jeff Kottkamp and Lieutenant Governor Carroll. I anticipate that would happen, and that was the first thought. I think he'll be strong, and his legislative roots were, the government doesn't appropriate a penny. It all begins in the legislative process. So I think he'll be really good for us in that capacity.
Steve, any comments on that?
I'll echo what the senator had to say, and to your point, Jeff Kottkamp was strong for Charlie Crist when he was the governor, and he came down and he worked closely with Thad and I on a lot of issues, along with this Brevard delegation at the time. Debbie Mayfield, sitting here today, was in our delegation, and this was kind of home plate for what was going on in space. And we've got to recognize that obviously there's Cecil Field and there's other areas in the state that we work on with regard to Space Florida, but it's become more of a conversation of aerospace in general, and I think Carlos is a strong advocate. In fact, we went to a launch together. He came for one of the launches back in our early days in the process. So he has an appreciation for what happens here in Florida with space and understands the importance to our economy. So I think that he'll be a strong proponent, but as the senator mentioned, it's just hard to say how the governor will structure that. If he wants to still be hands-on with that, then he will be. But otherwise, we'll have a great opportunity with Carlos to be that voice.
Other questions? Kim, over here.
Okay.
Oh, we got two of them going. Great. Thank you, Karen.
Good morning. In regards to the pension reform, are there any plans to look at the ability, municipalities are restricted by the ability to do comprehensive reform by our inability to access the Chapter 185 and 175 premiums collected on the insurance. We're trying, including the city of Cocoa Beach, to change to a defined contribution, but in computing the math, we have an unfunded actuarial liability that we could access those premiums. It would sure bridge that gap a little bit.
It's primarily an issue that the House has been carrying. Do you have any thoughts on that, Steve, on what the options may be? Might that be part of Speaker Weatherford's package?
It could be. I mean, the local pension piece has been something that's been up for debate in the House. And last year, obviously, Mayor, I think you'll remember, and then Mayor Tolley from Titusville came up and worked on this quite a bit, as well as Jerry Sansom on behalf of Rockledge. And it's something that we got to the end on last year, and it just wasn't the right piece of legislation to push through. So I think that will be part of the conversation. I think that Senator Ring and Caldwell are working on that again this year. So so it's an issue that will be brought before us. And as far as the local pension deal, I can't tell you for sure that the House has all agreed on the best approach. I know that we've all agreed on the FRS program, but the local pension issues, it's a separate issue, and we're trying to work through that.
Other questions? Well, that keeps us pretty much on time. I'm going to shut us down unless I'm going to ask one more time, like an auctioneer. Going, gone.
I always have a question I like to ask, if I may. And I've already asked Representative Crisafulli, what is the state doing about citizens As we all know, we have trouble finding insurance over here, and it seems like we're paying more and more to cover citizens. So is there a movement? I know it's supposed to be a friendly legislative session, but it's important to this area.
We've worked over the last several years to try to find answers to citizens, and the answer is a free market approach and trying to get the state of Florida out of the insurance business. I believe in that. I mean, it may not be a popular belief, but the state of Florida can't continue to fund that, and I think the best thing we can do is have a competitive insurance program in place, or a competitive market in place that will drive down prices. Now, I will tell you that Office of Insurance Regulation said prices are coming down on insurance, which I don't know that I've seen that, but maybe somewhere in the middle part of the state we've seen that. But the hope is that we let what we've worked on over the last couple of years get into place. And I think one of the biggest things that the legislature is guilty of is never letting whatever piece of legislation they pass work. And they're always trying to improve it. Well, I will be the first one to tell you that the legislature is guilty of that. And I think that we need to let what we have in place work and see if there's a positive result to that. And I think that ultimately having these takeout companies come in and try to work through that process of lowering rates. And I've talked to individuals that have gotten away from Citizens with some of these companies and have gotten a better product at a lower price. And the question is, does it stay there? And that's what we need to see, and only time will tell that.
Pat, comments?
I think we did major citizen reform last year that was designed to depopulate Citizens, or at least begin the process. I hear rumor that there may be more this year. I think one thing to really keep in mind, though, when we look at citizens reform, is that if we are going to have a market-based approach, then we should have a one Florida approach. There's an effort that inland communities and those up in the Panhandle want to force the coastal region to absorb 100% of the risk of being near the shore. But we know 80% of the wealth of the state comes from the coastal regions. People want to live here, businesses want to move here. With the exception of one area, the Orlando area, every major metropolitan area in our state is located on the coast. And taxes are a lot lower. There's a lot of programs and good roads inland when you get away from the coast because we pay for them. And so I think it's only fair that we have a broad pool, that Florida one, that everyone shares the risk, maybe not 100% to a degree. So when we debate issues of citizens, I certainly want the coastal regions to be represented strongly. I know Senator Posey had done a wonderful job of that in the past, and I think it's important that we keep in mind that the risk is on the coast, but the jobs and the wealth and the tax revenues are on the coast as well. And if we find it where people cannot get insured and find insurance that's affordable on the coast, it will have serious economic detriment to our state as a whole. I want to say a couple quick things. One other, you mentioned, Pete, the tourism funding. I visit Florida. Our tourism industry kept us afloat during the recession. A very important piece of that is the $1.5 million recurring that Speaker Crisafulli was so instrumental in helping us get in the legislative process to promote the Space Coast. That was set aside, again, because at a time when the state was setting records in tourism, we were losing tourists in the Space Coast because of lack of launches. So certainly appreciate what the governor did in that appropriation, supporting that appropriation. Hopefully we'll get that back this year. Dean Mead, Pete Dunbar on the same team. Whoa, that's great for the Space Coast. And I was so excited to hear that. Kim I've known for years, Mason known for years, and this guy's a giant in Tallahassee. I mean, a giant. Probably, maybe the smartest guy up there. But really, it's a great honor to be a part of this. And thank you for allowing us here.
Senator, thank you. No more questions. Let me do the following. One, we'll get everybody out on time, Kim, as we promised we would do. Thank you on behalf of myself and my partners at Dean Mead. We thank you for coming out today, but especially for the two gentlemen that are joined us here on the panel today, Representative Steve Crisafulli, Speaker-Designate, Senator Thad Altman. Thank you for being with us today. I also want to acknowledge Representative Debbie Mayfield. These are three outstanding members of Florida's legislature, and I hope you enjoyed what they had to share with us today. Join me with thank you.